This is Salmon Wars. All right, AJ, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate it. So, welcome to Salmon Wars. We are doing this limited run investigative series talking about the impact that bycatch and other issues have had on cratering salmon runs. I'm here with AJ. He is the owner of Three Rivers Fly and Tackle here in Wasilla. His business is deeply, obviously, affected by cratering salmon runs, and we're here to talk a little bit about how he views the subject as an advocate, but also as a business owner in the space. Is it a huge member of the local economy, and just how these issues are impacting him? So, AJ, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been here at the shop for 7 years. Mike Hudson, who's running around helping customers right now, has been the grandfather of this place for the last 33 years. We've been entrenched in our valley. We've helped out our local schools with ice fishing programs. We're an all-season shop, so we also handle terminal tackle and the fly stuff. So we entrench ourselves in the youth and what we have going on as far as what we're talking about today with the salmon wars, if you will, or the depleting resource that we're all seeing across the state. But we're always here to help you guys out with any questions. We have very knowledgeable staff, and 7 days a week, stop in and see us with any questions you have, any comments regarding this once it's out. If you need to talk to anybody, myself, Mike, any of us are great people to glean knowledge off.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, nobody really knows the rivers in this area, I would say, better than you guys do. So, I mean, it's an old adage among fishermen that if you need, like when I moved here, right, I was looking for where to get started fishing and stuff, and this was the first place I came.
Yeah.
As a fisherman myself. So, with that, how did you kind of get into fishing?
Oh, well, like many of us grandparents, grandparents and parents, it's kind of a lineage thing. We see that quite a bit in the shop here with people that have grown up fishing one way, and then you come to Alaska and you just want to keep that tradition going. For now, my kids are passing that on. So getting them out, getting them into the outdoors. And our job is to help advocate for that healthy relationship between the angler and the person training. So the guide, which the unpaid guide is called mom, dad, grandpa, and grandma. So that's kind of what got me into the whole scene. And then it just got more serious as the passion started fueling. And the one thing I love about this industry is you'll spot a liar if they've told you that they know everything about fishing, because it's just constantly evolving. There's a ton of fish species and rigging styles and techniques. So it's just one of those things that always challenges my mind. And
Awesome. All right. So, the reason we're here, right? It's pretty clear that you know a little bit about fishing in Alaska, right? Being a tackle shop owner and a longtime fisherman. Anybody who follows his Instagram feed, if you want to get jealous, I highly recommend that. But would you say that that Alaska has a salmon issue?
oh yes, and it's statewide. And I'm not throwing anybody under the bus with that statement, but even our own state's data is pointing to giant declines in our salmon population.
So if there were three issues, right? Like, we don't want to boil it down to one. If there was three issues affecting salmon, you don't have to do three. You could do more than three, but what would those be? Like, if you had to boil it down, if you were like, I could wave a magic wand today, and these are the things that we'd address, not necessarily fix. Just what do you think would be?
So that's going to have all sorts of fallout on the food for the food. So that is one natural issue, and that involves ocean currents changing, migration patterns changing. And so that is one issue that Mother Nature has thrown at us over the years that we continue to have to battle. The second issue, I would say, is overharvest in the blue water, meaning out in the deep ocean, the different methods that are indiscriminate on harvesting these fish. And generally in those areas, that isn't a state management issue, that's a federally managed issue. And so what we have is, like right now, the axe is being thrown at the trawl industry for the amount of biomass that they're literally throwing away in the ocean. The other interesting fact, I had a customer come in that works for the Coast Guard, and there's a fine line where U.S. waters end and it becomes international waters. And so these salmon don't see that line, right? So just because we're in Alaska doesn't mean those salmon stay in Alaskan waters. They go all over the place. So there's also international management issues that need to be addressed on a global scale or on a lat long scale, if you will, on their migratory patterns. And finally is once those salmon actually do get back to our rivers, it's in-river mismanagement that has caused us to also have a decline in current salmon population.
Okay. So let's break some of those down. So we talked a little bit about climate change. That's something that, certain interest groups like tend to, for lack of a better term, hide behind, right? From the trawl lobby. You see a lot of grass tops organizations that are popping up in defense of that. They're all like AstroTurf and just spitting out talking points. And a lot of the talking points you see are like, well, there's nothing we can do because it's all about the environment and it's all about climate change. But I just personally, as somebody who's seen 2 or 3 record runs of sockeye coming from the same ocean into the same rivers, right? Tell the listeners, because a lot of these listeners are going to be nationwide, like not in Alaska. So explain to them like why they're going to hear about. So most people, even I didn't know that there was 5 species of Pacific salmon before I moved here. So why are the sockeye booming and the kings and the chums declining rapidly across the board in every river system?
I think a lot of it. Okay, so I went to a trial meeting in Kodiak this last fall, and with this warming cycle, lots of things that take place. For example, they're finding that the crab molting, the molting season that they go through and they shed their shells is longer. And so when trawlers drop nets down, they're causing 100% mortality because they don't have hard enough shells to impact, get caught, and then be set free again. Mm-hmm. In the salmon world, what happens is with this, we have a giant biomass of a warming ocean. So plankton is plentiful, which is what sockeyes.
Oh, okay.
So we have that happening right now. As far as the kings, coho, and chum go, you have to look at that migratory patterns. Once it gets out of our waters, even if the feds are dropping the ball, it goes to an international issue. Once that international issue is kind of ignored, then all of that gets steamrolled. Also with sockeye, you have to keep in mind, and pink salmon, that both of those are enhanced, meaning they're hatchery programs. Generally, it's commercially driven. So it enhances that fishery to provide more food for the world, but at the same time, they're competing. You got pinks that are going from a little baby smolten to a 9-pound fish in 2 years. They're eating a lot of food, all right? And then there was these, lack of a better word, scientists, nerds. In Fairbanks, they did a study on salmon shark migration, and their migration's changing. And I think out of like 50 king salmon that they tagged 5-year-old adults, so it was something like 35% were killed by salmon sharks. So these salmon already have such a long ladder to climb to get to where they can actually get back to their spawning grounds. On top of that, you got climate change. You have their migratory patterns. Their food's going away. Their food's traveling differently. The biomass of their food is being depleted by indiscriminate fishing methods. And so all of those are leaning against it. Now, on top of that, you get the rivers that are warming up. So the salmon that do get back and repopulate, we've had unnormally warm seasons up here in the summertime to where all of a sudden we're seeing water temps spike. A certain temperature, it's frying those eggs. On the flip side of that, big rain years. So we're getting these floods that are happening and it's washing out all of the substrate in there. So there's a fishing game program called Gravel to Gravel that was pretty good. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game gives you an idea. And basically the idea is, these eggs are hatched in the gravel. That's where the adult salmon starts, and then their life cycle goes from there. And each salmon's a little different on how long they spend in freshwater before they migrate out. And so all the health of the ecosystem has to be there in order for that one fish to come back X amount of years later. So some king salmon are 7 years in the ocean. It just depends on the species.
And that's where you get those big hogs from sometimes, right?
Sometimes,
versus
yeah.
like the jacks that we
correct.
see.
So, and a lot of that, we're seeing slot limits go down. And unfortunately for us, we've really lost a lot of the biomass of those big kings, those legendary Kenai kings. I mean, heck, on the park streets, it was nothing to catch 30-pounders. Now that's a trophy fish, and it's like, I understand what's hard on our hearts here is like, if you'd have seen this fishery 10 years ago, you'd understand the problem. But because Alaska is a transient state between the military and just the oil fields and people moving jobs so much, nobody sees what it was now, right? We've got 10 years where not.
Yeah, so that's something you told me the first time I came in here. So we were talking about salmon, and I was, it was like March, and I was getting psyched up for the season coming up. This was the first year I moved here, and we were talking about like, hey, what's a big fish look like? Like I said, like 20, 30 pounds, like you catch out of, out of the Great Lakes, and you're like, now, but like, and that's not an uncommon thing to hear. If you just talk to old timers around the state, and actually other people I've interviewed said the same thing, is that the salmon are getting less plentiful and smaller as time goes on because of some of these issues.
And we just had a customer stop in here and brought his certificate in from 1992 from the Kenai River, and his king weighed 79.8 pounds. And that was one of the smaller ones he had gotten, but he just got smart to go weigh that. I mean, it used to be, there were 100-pounders. They're few and far between, but you had a lot more slotted in that range at 40 to 60, let's say.
Right.
And now it's more 10 to 20.
Right.
So we just don't have that genetic strain, or ocean conditions have changed that's triggering those fish to go, I got to get to the river because my eggs aren't going to make it protein. I'm getting.
Okay. Okay. So when we talk about bycatch, just give, your average Midwestern fisherman, right? Like, why are Great Lakes kings exploding, but not, or even Argentina, right? Where like the ocean is significantly warmer down there.
Yep.
So are the rivers, right? Why are there trophy fish being caught there? But, these legendary rivers where, it used to be synonymous with Kenai and kings, right? Why have where's the disparity there?
So if this is a global thing, I want everybody to understand what bycatch is. And bycatch is a fish that is not targeted in a given permit. So let's say you're a seiner, let's say you're a trawler, let's say you're dip netting, let's say you're rod and reel fishing. And today we're going for pike and we catch largemouth bass, or we're going for king salmon and we end up catching chumps. The fish that aren't intended to be caught and are bycatch. So that's really what bycatch is. It's unintentional caught fish within a net or whatever system.
Sure.
The other thing that we all have to realize is that these fish, what was the other question you asked? The second part?
Just, when we're talking about, like in the context of bycatch, what's the difference between somewhere like Argentina or the Midwest and here?
Well, both of those places have what's called enhanced runs. And so what they're doing is offsetting the amount of bycatch and what's caught and harvested via rod and reel and natural mortality with enhancement. And there's data on both sides. It's science on both sides that say, yes, it's good to enhance a run. No, it is not. And so a lot of people want to stick to a native run on our rivers, which by definition is these fish have been here since the turn of the century. They want to keep that genetic strand in that water body. They don't want to mix breed with a tank fish, is essentially what that comes up to. Why the size has changed? Well, once you crop them out from years, and, rod and reel guys, sport fishermen are not innocent either. It'd probably been better to let those hens go that were bigger, but we just didn't know that, right? Now science has gotten more efficient. You don't have to go to the library. You can Google it. So
sure.
Information is being passed along in a much more regular.
They'll let you know in the comments.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And they're helping us share information. So then it allows us to make faster, more educated decisions on how to effectively manage a resource.
Okay. So, all right. So switching gears a little bit, we've talked about the science. Now let's talk about, everybody's favorite subject, the economy, right? Economics. Now, Alaska is driven by a couple different industries. It's oil, it's, like it or not, recreation and tourism, which is the industry that I would say that you were in. And then, there's the commercial fishing aspect. Now, a lot of times we hear from trawl lobbies that, hey, the reason why we can't focus on this trawl issue is because it's going to cost some Washington companies a lot of money, right? But what about the Alaskan companies, right? Like, talk to us about both the economic impact, because you got some great numbers that you were sharing with me just the other day about the economic impact just on our county, right? Matsu Borough. But, extrapolate that statewide, like, what does that look like?
Well, and that's been our biggest question. There's two big questions we've had: is the economic driver and then the subsistence side of it. So like a lot of native villages that rely on these food sources, these resources to provide food for their dog sled teams, families for winter, and that still exists up here in reality. And those runs are so depleted, the Yukon River's not allowed to set nets out. There's been just a lot of reduction in their ability to go out. So it's a constant evolving thing that we're battling. But the economic driver, we've always been very confused at why the borough doesn't hook up the state to file a lawsuit, because you're talking, I want to say the number, and don't quote me on this, but it was like $3,000 to come up to Alaska and fish king salmon, all in. If you were to come up, and that's gas stations, restaurants, you had tax. I mean, all of that stuff, it contributes. At one point, the Matsu fishing committee, advisory committee, did a study, and I want to say it was like $735 million were generated when we had healthy salmon, and we're probably at 20% of that now. And now with those fish gone, because everybody loves catching king salmon because they're this iconic fish, you have loss of interest. So angling hours are also going down. So it's a catch-22. It's like, how do you lobby against the big dogs, right? Well, when we have, like a $1 billion industry being flushed down the toilet, because of mismanagement on several levels.
In favor of money that ultimately leaves the state.
I would say 90% of it leaves the state.
I mean, a lot of those fish, the pollock that they're catching, are going to that.
A lot of those boats fill up in a different state. A lot of those boats don't contribute to the state of Alaska economy.
Right. Other than, like, what is it, 20 cents? Per pound or something like that tax. When they're selling some of the roe for $45 a pound.
Exactly. So that's been a long-term problem that I think more and more people are starting to see. I know we've had campgrounds close. We've had, we're a small little tackle shop, and we feel the ripple effects. Back in the glory days, we had 11 employees, 2 locations. We were open from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. and we were having people bust in the door in the morning and shoving them out at night. I mean, it was phenomenal.
Well, and you're the only tackle shop in Alaska, okay? So just again for listeners, I'm from the East Coast originally, and I know that, in a state where it's not near as the fishing culture, I could go 20 minutes in any direction and find another tackle shop. This is the only true tackle shop within, I'd say, 40 miles, 45 miles in any direction. And any of the other ones are either in Anchorage or so small that is it really a tackle shop, or is it just a place that stocks some lures, right, here and there? And a lot of those aren't even legal for the rivers up the highway system.
Correct.
So, it's if this is the last place to get tackled if this place closes.
Well, and that's the other big issue that you just touched on. I don't know if we had talk about this, but at those other stores, it's a grab and go store. Walmart, even Sportsman's, all these other stores that provide tackle to the community, it's a grab and go. Well, what you're not being told, or if you check out at the mom and pop shops, is we're very in touch with the regulations. We understand the emergency orders. For those of you outside of Alaska, and our fishery is managed based off of our general regulations. And then what happens is our Fish and Game here in the state does an evaluation. And then as runs increase or decrease, they do emergency orders, and that will liberalize the fishery, saying going from 6 fish to 12 fish, or it will reduce it if there are no fish. So that is how our states manage. Well, if you go and grab a hook, this year we have a 1/2-inch hook gap restriction on our rivers until, July 17th, I think it is. So if you're not aware of that and you go buy your own tackle, you're going to be breaking the law and will be ticketed for breaking the law. So that's where we shine in that industry. We also are there to be stewards of our resource. Any good guide in the industry, any good pro shop is going to tell you, like, we don't care if you had to close for kings. Yeah, we're all going to take it on the nose, but we care a lot about the future of our resource. So I want my kids to be able to catch a king. And right now, the way it's going, they're not going to be able to. So there's not even catch and release opportunities in our area this year other than at hatchery enhanced fisheries.
Right. So it's a great segue into what my next question was, which is the cultural impacts, right? I talked about the economy, right? It's pretty obvious that like a shop like this, even a beautiful, like pretty nice sized tackle shop, I've been into some smaller ones for sure, um, won't survive shutting down the Parks Highway for fishing, right? That's just the cold hard truth of the matter. But you know, this next generation of Alaskan kids, this next generation of American kids that maybe they're turning 18 and they're thinking to themselves, 'cause I know I had the same dream at one point. I want to go be a fly fishing guide up in Alaska for a couple of seasons, or I want to go, work at a lodge, or I want to go be a guide, eh, even on the ocean. Catch it. I know it's called Salmon Wars, but halibut are struggling too because of this bycatch issue. So, like, what what are the real impacts on culture locally here when these fisheries are in peril?
I think for me, my wife works a lot with tribes, and for me, I kind of take a tribal stance on like a lot of their artwork surrounds the salmon, right? And it's such a part of their culture. And so that is kind of the way our small tackle shop works is when you raise these kids up seeing these images of this king salmon, seeing the image of a filleted sockeye, of silvers bobber fishing and chum salmon coming out all calico with big lips. And that part of it sparks that child's interest back to the earlier questions we were talking about, like what got me into this. That's what does it. Well, with the loss of the resource, that drives that emotional connection with that fish disappears.
Yeah, they're never going to see those iconic fish.
And so why do they care? Right? It becomes a lost thing where it's like, no, you guys don't understand. It's
Unless
like,
you're a history nerd.
Right. Yeah. It's like these fish are dinosaurs at this point. Like, so you lose that cultural engagement with the resource by not being able to fish for it as well.
Well, the scary thing is that's already happened here in America. Like, I'm from the East Coast again, and we've got anadromous fish runs, not to the level that we have here, but, before I was born, but I'm only 30 years old, it was not, it was a common practice actually for the first Atlantic salmon on the Penobscot River to be gifted to the United States president. And that practice ended with the ESU listing of the Atlantic salmon within my lifetime and never recovered. Like there's still, less than 100 fish that return to that river every year.
Yep.
And those rivers all up and down the East Coast were teeming with those. Same thing with the American shad. Like there used to be a thriving. It's called the founding fish for a reason, but it used to be so culturally endemic to that region. But it's almost scary how quickly it fades away.
Correct.
Because you're one generation away from if those kids don't fish for it, then they're all about smallmouth bass, or
Well, in a life cycle of a fish, so they're very resilient fish, salmon are, but the life cycle of the king salmon is long, right? It's the longest of the salmon species. So all the things in that habitat and network and chain that they got to come back to that gravel it impacts. And that's where, the sports fishing has been shut down for almost 10 years now.
right.
And at what point does everybody else have to chip in? Because we always take as conservationists take the brunt of the responsibility, and at least we get the least.
Well, and we're shutting the door after the horses are stolen. You know what I mean? And that was actually my next question, which is, what are the? I'm sorry, but like if you had to name like one aspect of the fishing industry, so like there's three in my opinion. There's small mom and pop commercial guys. There's the big factory commercial guys, and there's the your sport fishermen, right? And that's the customer base that you serve, even through selling to guides and stuff. That's because that's who the guides cater to is us, regular folk who have a dream of coming up to Alaska or who live here or who raise their families here. And I can't afford to pay $50 a pound for salmon, but if I catch 2 or 3 kings, I've got some really good high quality meals for the rest of the year.
Well, that's that fourth category that was missed, and I think it's subsistence because we're very unique in that. That's true. Like, where else can you take a 5-foot net and go stick it into the water and spoon salmon? Like,
nowhere
legally. Illegally, there's lots of places, but legally, it's like There's not many places. And the reason is because we depend on that food source.
That's true.
You know?
Well, it's because, I mean, you think about how much more expensive it is here to go to the grocery store. Like, a lot of people are like, they just pay for it. But it's like, we're paying what you pay plus the barge tax to get it up here. Plus, it's not as fresh because it's been sitting in the harbor. Yeah. And so it's going to go bad in our refrigerator in 2 days. And, I almost have to go to the store every day if I want fresh food to eat, and I can't.
Yep.
And why should I have to eat canned food in 2024? Right. When there is a resource that's locally available. So yeah, that's actually a fantastic point. So, if there was one sector, I'll even add that one into it, that gets shafted the most, as it were, which would it be, right? Like if who would you say is the big dog in this fight? Who would you say is the small dog in this fight?
Well, up until a couple of years ago, I would have said that, side by side, because I would have said probably sport fishing and subsistence are in the same fight. And recently, I've kind of seen the mom and pop commercial guys. They're selling permits like crazy and taking it on the teeth. So it's been such a different war the last few years, and this war isn't new. But the war has always been sport fishing against com fishing, right? And com fishing has always been associated with trawlers and any style to include subsistence netting. Well, the unique difference is now that these fish aren't even getting to the river, and now you've got set netters, you've got seiners, you've got subsistence, you got sport fishermen that are all in the same boat. And instead of shooting at everybody else, I think now everybody's kind of on board with these leaky holes coming through the boat. And so they're just trying to paddle across the stream together, but they don't realize it yet. The handshakes haven't been. There's a relationship there that's got to be forged. And we're working on that, but it's sport fishermen, it's always the last pot. And the way our state is structured is it's supposed to be subsistence, sport fishing, commercial fishing, but it's always seemed in reverse. And
why do you think that is?
Lobbyists, man. Straight up money and greed.
It's accurate.
Yeah. and I would have no problem with the bycatch being fined or have those processors pay for it to feed our troops or feed our homeless or feed our needy people. Like make them not want to catch them. Make them not want to where it's coming out of their bottom dollar.
Well, so let's take a moment to pause there, right? Because you touched on something really important to this discussion, and that is you're saying force them to process it, which begs the question for a lot of people who don't understand what this means. We use a lot of fancy terms like bycatch and stuff like that. What happens to the fish when they get on a trawl vessel?
So on a trawl vessel, if it's not the allotted fish, this bycatch, remember we talked about that. It's not the allotted fish they're targeting. They scoop them back into the ocean.
By the shovelful.
By the shovel. And sometimes it's a whale. Sometimes it's a shark. Sometimes it's a walrus. They are indiscriminate on how they harvest. They are federally allotted X amount of bycatch based off of their federal allotments at what they deem healthy in an ecosystem.
And how much is that? Would you say that's like pounds or tons?
It's ton. Metric ton. I mean, it's a massive amount of biomass. And the other side of that coin, we don't want them coming into the port with a bunch of fish that they're then providing without having to pay money to get it done, because then it's just a reward.
Right.
We want them to come in and go, nope, once your holds are done, that's it. You bring it in. Any of the unallocated species, you pay for out of your pocket to get processed, and you're feeding America. It could be a donation.
Right.
Or they can write it off, but they gotta pay.
Right.
They gotta pay. There cannot be a reward. You're not a good fisherman.
Right.
I mean, if I go out and snag all my fish, you're going to look in an area you can't, you're going to go, what are you doing? That's unethical. You can't do that. And we're just sport fishermen. We're talking 1 or 2 fish. They're talking metric tons. And those people, there's no fine. There's nothing. And they have observers. One of our associates here, Leaf, his cousin, works as an observer. For the most part, it's a pretty honest, depending on the observer. But I've also met other observers that are hassled, and the feds will tell you, oh, it's against the law. Well, who's going to be there? Who's going to be there to tell them, like, you're going to get tossed off a ship?
And how remote are these ships, right? Like, is there a police department on?
Yeah.
Or,
No. So, and I wouldn't want to be around 12 salty dudes, that are like, you're going to report that? Are you really good luck sleeping tonight, buddy? Like that's the gist of it, man. And it happens. And I don't care what anybody says. It happens. And so it's a problem with ethics, right? That's the problem. Mike and I have said it to customers for the last couple of years. We go out and poach one extra fish. We are ticketed, fined. Your freezer can get taken.
Oh yeah,
Even at hatchery places, where it's an enhanced run.
Right.
It's that strict, and it should be. But the same rules are not applied to the big dog.
Well, we're also in a state where if I go out and shoot a moose and I don't take enough rib meat off the bones, I can go to jail.
They could put 31 tons in the ocean of halibut so far, I think it is this year or something. It's an astronomical number.
Yeah. Well, and they're
kidding me.
And a lot of times they're even fishing in halibut nurseries, stuff that where no one else is even allowed to drop. Not even a long liner can drop a line, but they can drag a net across the bottom.
And these nets, you guys, if you don't know, they're massive. Look them up. Look up trawler nets. I mean, we're talking.
Yeah, give us a scale there. Like
some of them, I think, are 1/2 mile by 2 miles.
So I was going to say as big as a mini mall, but that's even bigger.
Yeah. And it's just a giant purse that's getting everything. Crabs, whatever is in the way is getting netted. Heck, look at little Nemo. It's the same thing. Nemo with the first one, right?
Right.
Everybody's getting netted. I mean, that's the deal.
Wow. And so what does that do to the substrate of the ocean?
Right. That's the other thing, right? So we're killing off vegetation. We're killing off habitat, reefs. That stuff needs time to grow because it grows insects. It stabilizes soils. It does all this stuff that a lot of people overlook, but all of that stuff impacts the ecosystem.
We're just grinding it.
And we're grinding. And why it's allowed, I don't know. The fish fillet sandwiches is a big one. It's like, just stop eating, stop selling them. Like, you get a company like McDonald's on board to go, no, dude, we're done. Like, this practices are not.
Well, it's not even like, you can't tell me that the fish fillet sandwich is some bestseller for.
They wouldn't. So they're terrible.
I mean, I'm Catholic, and even I don't go there during Lent, like salmon, for one thing, is a objectively better fish to eat.
For sure.
Man. All right. Well, anything else that I'm not asking that you think people need to know about this fight, about your role in it?
You gotta. Yeah, I do have something. You gotta lean on your legislature. You can't sit by silently, and you can't come into your local tackle shop and just complain because that doesn't do anything. You have to go to meetings. You have to be present. You have to write your legislators. You have to express yourself and try to do so in a professional professional way. It's a very emotionally charged topic, so it's very easy to start yelling and getting very frustrated because the writing's on the wall is so obvious to the layman, so ignored by the people with money. But get active, and if you have any questions, reach out to your local small dealers. They're the ones that are going to be in touch with what's going on because they're the most affected. And start looking at the river yourself and seeing what's there. Talk to the old timers, man. It's one of the blessings of the shop is talking to the historians, which are the old guys that are sitting on the river and been here for 50+ years. They've seen cycles. We've seen droughts before a salmon, and they can come back. But with the current methods, it's not looking very optimistic. So I also want to thank you, ton, for thinking of us as a small shop and including us in this conversation.
It's really easy to pick because there's only one. I didn't have to do a lot of thought. I mean, I could have swung down to Anchorage, but
No, I appreciate it.
You're right in the thick of it too. Because I'd love for you to plug real quick, because you have a nonprofit, as I understand it.
We do.
That just kicked off. So tell them where they can support, where they can, be a part of that.
South Central Alaska Sport Fishing Association is the nonprofit we started last year. We're pursuing grant funding now for administration purposes, and then bank line restoration. We're really hoping to start having a solidified voice, like we talked about, linking that commercial, the subsistence, and sport fishermen all into one boat. Because in reality, a healthy fishery, everybody gets to enjoy, right? Not just one user,
right?
And it's a one-sided argument. So if you guys ever want that, we got QR codes at the shop. You can call the shop at 907-373-5434. Again, my name's AJ. Mike's been the gray tooth up here. He's been here longer than anybody else. And Leaf and Sal also work here, and they're a wealth of knowledge as well. So if you ever have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help.
Awesome. AJ, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you,
me.
brother. Appreciate it, man.
All right.